TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, Syria accuses Israel of perpetrating a second aerial strike on its territory within less than 48 hours. President Reuven Rivlin, following a marathon of consultations with Israel's separate political party chairpersons, announced his decision to grant Yesh Atid chairman Yair Lapid the mandate to try to form a government. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reveals that Washington does not yet know whether the Islamic Republic of Iran is in fact willing to return into compliance with the 2015 nuclear agreement. Unidentified aircraft, which Syrian reports claim to be Israeli helicopters, struck a Syrian regime military observation post said to be manned by both Syrian troops alongside Lebanese Hezbollah militants east of Jubata al-Hashab, which is a town that is situated within the 1974 buffer zone, which separates between the Israeli and Syrian territories on the Golan Heights. The aerial bombardment reportedly targeted a reconnaissance and monitoring militant company, which receives its directives from the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. And while the London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that 3 operatives were wounded, TV7 could not corroborate this report. Separately, the IDF spokesperson's unit did not confirm nor deny its responsibility for the strike in response to TV7's request for comment. It is worth mentioning, however, that this is a second time within 48 hours in which the Damascus regime has attributed responsibility for attacks on its territory to the Israeli Air Force. Turning to Jerusalem, where President Reuven Rivlin, following a marathon of consultations with Israeli political party chairpersons, announced his decision to grant Yesh Atid chairman Yair Lapid the mandate to try to form a government after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failed to do so within the time allotted to him under Israeli law.
על בסיס ההמלצות שקיבלתי מסיעות הכנסת ומתוקף סמכותי על פי סעיף 9 של חוק יסוד הממשלה, שוחחתי זה עתה עם חבר הכנסת יאיר לפיד והודעתי לו כי אני מעניק לו את המנדט להרכבת הממשלה.
President Rivlin, in his televised address to the nation, mentioned that the former finance minister Lapid had the pledged support of 56 of Parliament's 120 mandates, which is short of a necessary majority required to form a coalition. However, Yamina chairman Naftali Bennett, who did not recommend Lapid to attain the desired mandate, voiced his intention to join a unity government regardless and called upon members of the right-wing camp to join as well.
זה הזמן להקים ממשלת אחדות. כל מפלגות הימין מוזמנות פנימה. אל תתלוננו על המציאות, תייצרו מציאות.
In response to the president's decision to grant Yair Lapid the mandate to try to form a government after failing to do so himself, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held an emergency party meeting during which he voiced outrage over prospects of a unity government potentially forming.
האמת היא פשוטה. זאת תהיה ממשלת שמאל מסוכנת. שילוב קטלני של חוסר דרך, חוסר יכולת וחוסר אחריות.
It is important to explain that Yesh Atid chairman Yair Lapid now has 28 days to try to form a government coalition. If he fails to do so, the mandate will be then transferred to Parliament, or Knesset in Hebrew, to try and find yet another candidate for the task. A parliamentary candidate, if chosen by a majority of 61 mandates, would have 21 days to make a final attempt. If such an attempt fails as well, the Israeli parliament would then once again dissolve and force upon Israel an unprecedented 5th round of elections within 2 years. Turning to the High Court of Justice in Jerusalem, where a land ownership dispute is once again threatening escalation between Israel and the Islamist Hamas organization in the Gaza Strip. The dispute pertains to 4 Palestinian families who reside in 10 residential structures in an East Jerusalem neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, which is predominantly Arab. During the 1948 War of Independence, the families in question had apparently fled from elsewhere in the British-mandated Palestine. Upon the directives of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which ruled East Jerusalem from 1948 to 1967, these families were offered homes formerly owned by Jewish organizations in exchange for their agreement to relinquish their refugee status. However, despite claims that they had accepted the deal, a legally binding registration process was never completed, and the Jewish organization that had owned the properties prior to the Jordanian occupation of East Jerusalem in 1948 remained registered as legal owners. Therefore, after two court cases in which the magistrate and district courts in Israel ruled in favor of the Jewish organization's claims, the Palestinian families that currently reside in the structures refuse to accept the verdict and have appealed to the High Court of Justice, which is expected to adopt its ruling as early as next week.
احنا بالعيلة 14 نفر، 7 صغار و7 كبار. مش راح نطلع، ايش ما بده يصير يصير. زي ما قلت لك احنا مش راح نطلع، واذا بدنا نطلع يعني نطلع على زي ما بقولوا يقتلونا بنطلع، غير هيك مش راح نطلع. مش راح نطلع.
The Arab family's refusal to accept the past ownership of the East Jerusalem structures has seemingly been used by Palestinian and Islamist organizations as a pretext to stage rallies against what organized claim to be an orchestrated attempt by Israel to Judaize the Arab and Islamic characteristics of East Jerusalem, protests that systematically turn into riots.
وهذا برنامج متسلسل، هم بدأوا بالإخلاء من سنوات لحتى يغيروا هذا الحي من واقع عربي إسلامي إلى واقع يهودي بالقوة وبقوة السلاح.
Regardless of the violence, a number of Jewish residents who have already obtained per court order several of the properties remain unwilling to concede their claims.
This is our houses, but they want to control it. This is the Jewish country. They want to control it, so they do whatever they want. They throw rocks, they throw bottles, they do intifada. We want to live here quietly.
In response, the European Union, which regards East Jerusalem as occupied Palestinian territory, voiced alarm over the latest developments in Sheikh Jarrah. Separately, Mohammed Deif, the commander of Hamas's military wing, warned that Israel would pay a stiff price if it did not stop attacking residents of Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, in reference to police responding to riots in which the participants were explicitly heard chanting slogans in favor of Hamas, jihad, and perpetrating terror attacks against Jews. Turning to the United Kingdom, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in an interview with the British broadcast network, revealed that the United States does not yet know whether the Islamic Republic of Iran is in fact willing to return into compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly referred to as the 2015 Nuclear Agreement.
We've been engaged now in Vienna for some weeks with our European partners, with Russia, China, and indirectly, as you know, with Iran. I think we've demonstrated our very seriousness of purpose in terms of wanting to get back into the so-called JCPOA, compliance for compliance, and what we don't yet know is whether Iran is prepared to make the same decision.
Despite the voiced skepticism regarding Tehran's intentions, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is seemingly engaged in talks with the Ayatollah regime with the hope of alleviating regional tensions that are expected to increase once the Iran nuclear deal is revived. The talks between Tehran and Riyadh have apparently taken place in Iraq under the auspices of the Baghdad central government.
You have hosted, how many rounds of the Saudi-Iranian talks? How many rounds?
You are asking a direct question.
Yes, sir.
It's more than once.
3? I heard 3.
I'm not gonna say.
Yeah. Okay, you don't want to say anymore. Okay, let me.
But it is ongoing, and it is important, and it is significant. And for Iraq to be able to play that convenient role between these regional actors is important. And again, the theme is a stable, sovereign Iraq is a common interest of our neighbors. Instead of Iraq being a source of instability, let it be the common binding theme for bringing the region together.
It is important to know that despite the probability of the Vienna talks bearing fruit, the U.S. intelligence community's threat assessment for 2021, which is published on our TV7 Israel News website, assessed that Iran will present a continuing threat to U.S. and allied interests in the region, and that Iraq will be the key battleground for Iran's influence this year and during the next several years. Thank you for watching us. As part of TV7 Israel's prayer initiative, I would like to encourage you today to join myself and the team here in Jerusalem to lift up Canada in prayer for its salvation and peace, alongside prayers for our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world, in addition to our ongoing prayers, of course, for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you an Erev Tov U'Mevorach, and we will see you again tomorrow at the same time.